Hey developers, my name is Vahid and I'm your host in your Sakura Dev channel. In this episode of our comprehensive Drizzle ORM tutorial, I'm going to show you how we can do seeding with Drizzle ORM. So seeding means that we are going to insert some dummy data into our database for testing purposes. And we want to do that automatically with just one command in our terminal. I will also show you how you can put some realistic data into your database without needing to hard code them in your seed file. Before seeding process, I'm going to create a diagram for our Drizzle ORM schema so you will learn how to seed your database with Drizzle ORM as well as all types of the relationships between the tables in our schema. Before moving forward, I will be really glad if you like the video and subscribe to my channel. That will be icing on the cake. So now let's get right into it. So I open up the project that we've been developing through this course. Here, as you can see, we have an app directory which belongs to the Next.js, and then we have the DB directory where we have created our Drizzle ORM files. So here, let me open up the schema file. Okay, this is the schema file that we have created in the previous episode of this playlist. So as you can see here, we have the users table, we have the post table, we have the categories table, we have the post on categories table, and also we have the profiles table. And because we are going to see this schema here, first you need to understand the tables and the relationships between the tables in this schema. So in order to do that, I'm going to quickly create a diagram for this schema file so you can understand the table structures and the relationships between the tables in this Drizzle ORM schema file. So now let's do that. So now here I'm going to create a diagram for our schema so you can understand the relationships between the tables better. So let's create a diagram here. Okay. And here we have the user table. Let's define an icon for it. Okay. It is going to be user icon and it has an ID, which is going to be a serial, and it is our primary key. Then it has a full name inside it, which is going to be a text. It has a phone, address. Again, it is going to be a type text, and then it has the score inside it, which is going to be an integer. Okay. Then we have a profile table. So let's define a icon for it. Okay. It has the ID inside it, which is going to be a serial. So as you know, serial is a type inside the PostgreSQL that we can use for primary key. So it is going to be its primary key, and then it has a bio inside it, which is going to be a text, and then each profile has a user, which its type is from the users table. So now we can draw the relationship between the users and profiles. So profiles, the user is going to have a one-to-one relationship to the users table, and let's connect it to the user.id. So as you can see, the profiles table is connected to the users table, and there is a one-to-one relationship between them. It means that each user has only one profile, and each profile belongs to only one user. Okay, so now let's define the other table inside our schema here. We're going to have a post table, posts, and let's create an icon for it. Okay, and inside it we're going to have the ID, which is going to be serial. Okay, and it's going to be primary key of the table. Each post has a text inside, which is going to be a varchar. Okay, and then it is going to have a author, which is actually a user that created the post. So its type going to be from users, and now we can define the relationship between the post and user. So posts.author has a many-to-one relationship and then connect it to the users table. So each user can have multiple posts, but each post can only have one author. Okay, so this means that the user has a one-to-many relationship to the post table, and post table has a many-to-one relationship with the users table. Okay, and then we're going to have the categories table. So we have the categories. Okay, and then the category has an ID, which is going to be a serial, and it is going to be the primary key of the table, and then it has only a name inside it, which its type is varchar. Okay, now we are going to create a many-to-many relationship between the categories table and the post table. So each post can have multiple categories, and each categories in the same time can belong to multiple posts. So this means that we have a many-to-many relationship. But when we are going to create a many-to-many relationship in SQL-based databases, we can directly connect two tables with a many-to-many relation. We need to create a pivot table which sits between the main two tables. So now let's create the pivot table. So we have the posts on categories. Okay, it has a post ID inside it, okay, which is going to be an integer, and it has an category ID which is also going to be an integer. Okay, this is our pivot table, and then we need to connect this pivot table to the categories and post table. So we're going to say that each post can have multiple categories. So the relationship between the post and post on categories must be a one-to-many or vice versa, many to one from post categories to post tables. So here we're going to say post categories that post ID has a many to one relation with the post table. Okay, and as you can see here, each post can now have multiple categories. Okay, we're going to do the same with the categories table. So we're going to say post on categories that category ID have a many to one relationship to the categories table. Okay, so actually we are saying that each categories can belong to multiple posts. So as you can see, we have a one-to-many relationship between the categories table and post on categories, and in the same time we have another one-to-many relationship between the post table and post on categories table. So this is the diagram of our Drizzle ORM schema file, and in the next section of this video we are going to see these tables with these relationships with some dummy testing data. So now let's get right into the next section. We want to implement a seeding functionality so we can easily initialize our database with some dummy data for testing purposes. So in this way, we don't need to manually put the testing data in our database. We will write a seeding file, and then every time we want to initialize our database with this seeding data, we can do this with just one command in our terminal. So now let's do that. So in the first step, I'm going to create a file in the DB directory, and let's call it seed.ts. And here in the first step, we need to create a connection to our database. And note that here we can't use the DB object that comes from the index file. As you can see here, we export a DB object, but we can't use it here in the seed database because we are going to run this seed file independently in our terminal without running our project. So here we need to create a separate connection to our database. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a connection pool to our database. So I'm going to say const pool and set it to a new pool which comes from the PG, and then here inside it we can define the connection string. So in the configuration object here, I'm going to set the connection string, and we're going to extract the connection string from the env file. So here I'm going to say process.env.database URL. So in the previous episode of this tutorial, we have put our database URL in our env file. So if I go to the env file, you can see that we have a database URL variable inside it. So let's get back to the seed.ts file, and we're done with the creating the new pool, and then we can create our DB client. So here I'm going to say const DB and set it to Drizzle function that comes from the Drizzle ORM /node Postgres, because we are using the Postgres database here. Then we're going to pass the pool object that we have just created. Okay, so that's it for the creating the new DB client in our seeding file. Okay, so in the next step, we need to create a main function, and inside this main function, we can actually insert some dummy data to our database. So here I'm going to create the main function. It is going to be an async because we are going to access to our Postgres database inside it. So it should be an async function. Okay, and let's call it main. And then here inside the main function, we can log a message into our console, for example, seeding started. So here I'm going to say console.log, for example, seeding started. Okay, and then here we are actually going to insert some dummy user into our database. For example, let's say we are going to insert 10 users into our database. So here I'm going to write a for loop here for, and let's create an index the starting point of our for loop is going to be 0. Then while the index is less than 10, we're going to loop through this for loop. And then every time we're going to increment the index. So this is our for loop. And actually it's been a long time since the last time I used the for loop in the JavaScript. So yeah, the for loop sometimes comes handy in JavaScript. Okay, so let's get back to our tutorial. We're going to create a user const user object and set it to await DB, the DB client that we've just created, and then insert, okay, pass the tables object, which is the users, and this comes from the schema file. Okay, and then we're going to change the values function, and inside it we can put our values for a new user. So here we're going to set the address to something like First Street. Okay, this is a really dummy address, and we're going to have a full name, which is going to be my name. Okay, my name is Vahid, and the Sakura Dev is the name of my channel, so don't confuse them. Okay, then we're going to have the phone, which again is going to be a dummy number, and we're going to have a score. So the score can be between 0 and 100. So we're going to put, for example, 95 as the score of this user. Okay, so that's it for the values of the new user. And then we just call the returning function, because we are going to retrieve the user after inserting that user into our database and put it inside this user object here. Okay, so after inserting each user, we need to insert the profile for that user. Now let's go to the diagram, and you can see that we have the users table that has the one-to-one relationship with the profiles table. So as you can see here, we connect the profile table to the user table through the user ID inside the profile table. So here we need to access to the user ID of the new user. Here I'm going to say const user ID and set it to user. And since it can be a list of user, we're going to access through the first user here and then get the ID of the user. So I'm going to get the ID of the inserted user from our database. And then we can insert the profile in the same way. So here I'm going to say const profile equals to await db.insert. Okay. And then pass the profile table object, which comes from the schema file, and then change the values function and then pass our values. So here we need to put the user ID here. So in this way we can relate this profile to the previous user that we have inserted into our database. So note that here we are still in the for loop, and every time we insert a new user, we're going to insert a profile record into our database for that user, and then we're going to insert the next user. So here I put the user ID here, and we're going to set the bio of the profile to something like web developer. Okay, and in each iteration of the for loop, we're going to insert a user and then insert a profile for that user. So after the for loop, we have 10 users into our database. Here you might notice a problem. We're going to have the same data for all our 10 users. We're going to have the first street as the address of all our 10 users, the same name for all our 10 users, and so on. I'm going to show you how you can easily fix this problem later in this video so you can have different data for your different users. But for now, let's insert some posts and categories into our database. So first we need to insert some categories into our database. Here after the first for loop, we're going to insert 2 categories into our database. So here I'm going to say const cats, which stands for categories, and then set it to await and call the db.insert and pass the categories table object, which comes from the schema file, and then change the values function. And here we can pass a list here instead of an object. So in this way we can insert multiple categories in the same time without using a for loop here. So in this list, we're going to create an object that will set the values of the first category record. The name of the first one is going to be, for example, sports, and the name of the second category is going to be, for example, economics. Okay, so here after the values function, we're going to change the returning function, and this will retrieve the inserted categories and put them inside the cats object here. Okay, and then we're going to insert some posts into our database. So I'm going to say const inserted posts. We have a typo here. Let's fix that. Okay. And then set it to await db.insert, pass the post table, which comes from the schema file, and change the values function. Again, pass a list here because we are going to insert multiple posts, and here pass the first post. We're going to set the author ID, which we are going to set it to the ID of the last user ID that we have inserted. So let's define a variable here, user ID. Let's user ID. Okay, and then we don't need to define the user ID every time in every iteration of the for loop here. So just use that user ID that we have defined outside of the for loop. So let's set a initial value to it. We're going to set it to 0, for example. Okay. And after the for loop is finished, we have the user ID of the last inserted user into our database. So here we can use the user ID again. Okay, so this post will be the post of the last user that we have inserted into our database in the previous section. Okay, and then we're going to have a text for this post, which is going to be some test text. Okay, this is a really dummy data. I'm going to show you how you can use some more realistic values without needing to hard code them into our insert statement later in this video. So keep watching. I will handle that in just a couple of minutes. Okay, so let's copy this post object here and paste it here. And for example, let's set the text of the second post to the text2, for example. And then we need to call the returning function. So again, it's retrieve the inserted post and put them into the inserted post object here. Okay. After that, we need to populate the post on categories table, our pivot table between the post and categories table. So again, now let's get back to the diagram. And as you can see, we have the post on categories table, which sits between the post and categories table. As you can see, it connects our two main tables, the categories and post table. So as you can see, the post table has a one-to-many relationship with the post on categories table. And also you can see that the categories table has a one-to-many relationship with the post categories table. So this post on categories table actually create a many-to-many relationship between the post and categories table. So now let's get back to our seed file and insert some data into the post on categories table that connect the post to the categories. So in order to relate the post with the categories, we need to populate our post on categories because there is a many-to-many relationship between our post and categories table. Okay, so let's move on, and here I'm going to say await db.insert and then pass the posts categories table here. Okay, and then change the values function so we can put our values inside there. As you might notice here, we don't want to retrieve the inserted values here from our database, so we don't need to save the returning object of these db.insert in an object here. So let's get back to the values function, and here let's put our first values. The category ID should be the cats, which contains the inserted categories that we have inserted here. Okay, so let's get back to it, and we are going to connect the first categories with the first inserted post. So here category 0.id. Okay, and then set the post ID with the first inserted post. So I say set the index 0 and then get the ID. So in this way, we are connecting the first category into the first inserted post. Okay, let's say this post, the first post, has two categories, the category 1 and category 2. So let's connect the second category to the first post. Okay, we're going to have a second object here. Category ID would be cats1, which is our second category. Their ID, and we're going to connect it to the first post. So we set the post to inserted post index 0.id. Okay, and now let's do the same for the second post. So let's copy that, and here let's paste them. The first category will be connected to the second post, and also we're going to connect the second post to the second category as well. So both posts here have the category of sports and economics in their categories list. And after that, we're going to just console.log a message that signifies the end of the seeding process. So here console.log a message like seeding finished. Okay, so that's it for the seeding function. We're going to end the processing of this file. So I use the process.exit 0. So again, remember that we are going to run this file independently from our project. We don't need to run our project. We're going to run this file directly from our terminal. I'm going to show you how we can do that in a second. In order to do that, we're going to call the main function here that we have just created. So main function is the function here that inside it we have written our insert statements. Okay, so we're going to call it here because it is a async function. We're going to change the then function. Okay, and then we're going to change the catch function in case of any error. So here I just console dot error, the error object if there is an error, and then end this process. So I use the process.exit and then pass the 0 to it. So in this way we can end a process in the Node.js. Okay, let's save this, and we're done with this seeding function for now. Later in this video I'm going to show you how I can put some more realistic data as the values of these dummy objects into our database. But for now, let's run this file from our terminal. Okay, in order to do that, I'm going to the package.json file here. Okay, and here inside the script object, I'm going to put a db.seed script here so we can run it from our terminal. So here I'm going to say db:seed and then put the script for running the seed file. So here we're going to run it with the node and then -r esbuild register, and then we are going to put the address of our seed file. So it's on the src directory and then db and then seed.ts file. Okay, so here we have an error, and that's because we need to put a comma here after the previous script. Okay, that's it for the creating a new script in our package.json file for the db seeding. Let's save this, and here let's open up the terminal. First, let me show you the tables of our database in the Drizzle Studio. So here I'm going to say npx drizzle kit and then studio. If you want to know how to configure the Drizzle Studio, you can watch the previous episodes in this playlist. Okay, here we can run the Drizzle Studio. As you can see, we have the tables here, and there is nothing inside all the table of our database. So for example, let's open up the users table. You can see no data here. So let's zoom in so you can see it better. Okay, so let's get back to the VS Code and let's open up a new terminal here. And now we can run the db::seed script from our package.json file to run the seed.ts file. Okay, so I'm going to use npm run db::seed. Okay, so we have an error here, and it says that the client password must be a string. So let's get back to the seed.ts file. Here we have created a pool, and the connection string is coming from the process.env file. So since we want to access to the env file, we need to import the .env/config. So in this way we can access to the process.env file. If we don't import that module, we can't access the process.env variables. They all will be undefined. So here I'm going to import .env and then /config. So let's save this, and again let's open up the terminal. Let's clear this up. Okay, let's run the previous command npm run db::seed. So here, as you can see, seeding is started and then seeding finished. Okay, so now let's go back to the Drizzle Studio, and here, as you can see, we have 10 users inside our database. And let's get back to the categories table. You can see we have 2 categories, sports and economics. Again, let's get to the post table. You can see we have 2 posts and so on. But let's get back to our previous problem. In our seeding file, we can see we have the same data for all 10 users. So we have 2 options here. Either we can hard code different data with different users in the seed file, which is really tough to do that, but we can use a easier approach, and that is using a faker package. So with the faker package, we can use some random realistic data inside our seed file. So let's get back to VS Code, and here let's install the faker. So I'm going to use npm I at faker-js/faker. Okay, it is installed, and now we can go to the seed.ts file and use the faker package. So here inside the user initiation statement, instead of hard coding the street name here, we can use the faker, which comes from the faker package, okay, that location, and call the street address. So this will create a random street address for us, which will be different in each iteration of the for loop here. Okay, so with the name of the user, we can have faker.person.full name. Okay, we're gonna call the full name here, and for the phone here, we can have faker.phone, okay, .number. And for the score, we can use a random number in the range of 0 and 100. So here I'm gonna say faker.number, okay, and that int function, we can specify the min, which is going to be 0, and also max, which is going to be 100 in this case. Okay, we can do this with the profile here. So in the bio of the profile, we can call faker.person.bio function. Okay, it will create a random bio for our profile record here, and it's okay to have two categories with the sports and economic. So we don't want to use the faker object in the categories, but instead we are going to use the faker object in the post insertion statement. So here in the text property, we're going to call the faker.lorem, which can create a random text for us, and we can create a random sentence. Okay, we're going to do that with the second post here, faker.lorem.sentence. Okay, so let's save this, and now let's run the seed function again. Okay, npm run db:/seed. Okay, the seeding process has finished. And if I go to the Drizzle Studio here and refresh the page, you can see after the first 10 users which we have already inserted into our database with the same hard-coded data, we have another 10 users, but this time the data about each user is different with each other. You can see we have different name, different phone, different address, and different score for each user. Okay, that was really great if we want to create some testing data inside our database. So let's go to the, for example, post table here. You can see after the first two posts which we have created in the first phase of our seed with the same hard-coded data, we have second two posts which has different data inside the post text. If I go to the profile table, you can see the first 10 profile are those that we have hard-coded in the first phase, but the second 10, they are different with each other. You can see it's kind of realistic bio text that they're kind of like more to the bios inside the social media about a person. Okay, so in this way, we can create some realistic data without needing to hard code the testing data in the seed file. And yeah, that's it for this video. And if you liked the video, please hit the like button. That makes me really happy. And if you want more tutorial like this, you can subscribe to my channel. That would be icing on the cake for me. See you in the next video. Bye bye.